So apparently Pop is not one of the best coaches, at least top 10 in the NBA.
You are Locked On Spurs, your daily San Antonio Spurs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome back to Locked On Spurs right here on the Locked On NBA Network. I'm your host, Jeff Garcia, Spurs writer for Ken's 5 San Antonio. Glad to have y'all back. Happy Wednesday, everybody. You're at Hump Day. We'll keep you going. Get you through the work week right here on Locked On Spurs. As always, we thank you for making Locked On Spurs your first listen every single day. Pick a platform, we're there. Ken's 5 Plus app, yep. YouTube, yep. iTunes, yep. Seriously, everywhere. Locked On Spurs, Locked On just podcasts in general. Subscribe to all of them right now. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. What are we talking about today? Well, you can see on your screen if you're watching, if you're listening, we're going to be talking about Popovich. CBS Sports put out their rankings of the top coaches in the league, and yeah, Pop was not listed among the top 10. Is he? Well, basically, was he shunned? Was that a slight? Was that some disrespect? Why or why not? We'll see what our guest has to say. If CBS Sports got it right that Pop is no longer a top 10 coach, we're going to be discussing that. And we're going to be looking at you guys Locked On Spurs fan comments. So yeah, circling back to topic number one, CBS Sports, as mentioned, they put out, just a ranking of all the coaches and everything. It's kind of good news and bad news. The good news is Pop wasn't at the bottom of the list, so yay. But he's kind of hovering around the middle of the pack. CBS Sports gave him his own tier as well. And before we start bashing it, or we'll likely bash it, all right? It's Locked On Spurs. What do you expect? They put out kind of a criteria of why they had Popovich out of the top 10. It ranged from, three-point shooting. Seriously, three-point shooting. They threw in the Tim Duncan effect. Literally, it's like this whole laundry list of why they feel that Popovich is no longer a top 10 coach. But there's some interesting points to make about the top 10 coaches that obviously don't include Popovich. You'll see what we're talking about. So who's going to be joining me today? He is back, everybody. He is Matt Guzman. He writes with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. They would say, where is that guy? See, he was hiding. He didn't want Popovich to see this. That's why. He's all in on Popovich no longer a top 10 coach. Is that right, Matt?
Wow. Not necessarily. I'm not so sure I buy it, but it's great to be back. I appreciate you having me on.
Not a problem. By the way, good 6-man row. Matt is coming off the bench for us today. We had a shift-in guest, so we did like a WWE style. We just tagged him in. He came off the ropes. He jumped in, dropped a forearm on Locked On Spurs. He said, "I'm here." Make sure to follow him on X at MattGZMAN. You see it on your screen. Again, he is with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. He'll talk about that in a few minutes. We'll give him his moment to brag about what he's doing over there. But Matt, the reason you're here is because CBS Sports recently put out a list of the top coaches in the league. Popovich was not considered top 10, at least according to CBS Sports. As mentioned earlier, they did give him his own tier. And maybe we should couch this first before we get in, is that the write-up was not completely bagging on Pop. I mean, they called him the GOAT, one of the best. They said, hey, your argument is that Popovich is the best. We get it. We understand that. So they were not fully bagging on Popovich. So let's make that very clear. But there's some issues with their criteria of why he's no longer top 10. Let's start off with, for me, and I thought was kind of a big point, was the lack of playoff success, or just lack of playoffs, period. I mean, since 2017. Matt, you're the guest. Let's start off with that topic there. What do you think about that? You think that was should have been thrown at Pop's way, because that's really not completely his fault.
Right, absolutely. This is a coach that, they mentioned this too. He's been with the Spurs for so long. He's been with the ups and downs of the franchise. When he came in, he kind of turned things around, and he's a big part of their success historically. But over the last couple of seasons, they haven't had the teams that they had back in the day. They've had great players, they have young talent, but they're still working on developing those guys. It's not necessarily his fault. I don't think you can fault him for the Spurs not being in the playoffs, because you're essentially saying at that point that it's his job to turn any team as it is and make it a 50-win franchise. Not to say that can't happen or it won't happen, especially with Wembanyama now, but I don't think it's been completely his fault that, these guys are young, and he hasn't had Tim Duncan. He hasn't had Manu Ginobili or Tony Parker, the guys that made that true dynasty what it was. So, I mean, I think it's fair to include, how has he done
Sure.
as of late, but I don't think it's fair to necessarily blame him for the youth or the inexperience of his players.
Yeah, look, the last I checked, he doesn't wear the hat of general manager, and I'm pretty sure he has the input of it as well. But he's not. That's not his job anymore. That's Brian Wright's now. So over the last few years, it's Brian Wright's job to put a team together. So if that's the team that Brian Wright trots out, then that's the team that Pop usually is going to have to work with. Obviously, we get he's going to have his input. He's earned that. But more likely than not, it's Brian Wright's job to assemble a team. And second of all, too, in that span, I mean, he couldn't predict the Kawhi Leonard situation. You lost a franchise player. You can't tell Tim Duncan, hey, we don't need you to retire like ever. You can't do that. And nor to Parker and Manu Ginobili. My thing with that point with CBS Sports was that every single franchise in pick a pro league football, MLB, NBA, they all franchises go through this. Every single one of them. Look at the Patriots. You got yourself a cornerstone with Tom Brady. He leaves. Oh no! Guess what happens? Does that make Belichick, one of the worst coaches now? Not because no, I don't think you do that. It's that's just nature. It's just nature of sports. Everybody has their ups and downs. But the thing is, Matt, we're gonna go to the next point here. They also brought up the Tim Duncan effect, and we kind of alluded to that. Tim Duncan retired. Pop can't stop that. But again, don't all great NBA coaches have that guy on the roster to make them great?
Absolutely. We've seen it plenty of times. There's not, Gregg Popovich is not going to be nearly as successful as he is without Tim Duncan. But Steve Kerr as a coach isn't going to be nearly as successful as he is without Stephen Curry or Kevin Durant, Eric Spoelstra without LeBron, and it's not that these coaches have been carried, because they absolutely, make that team better and they are a big part of the success. But you can't just say that, it falls completely on Gregg Popovich, because yes, he was boosted by Tim Duncan, and he got lucky again now that he has Victor Wembanyama, if he pans out the way he's supposed to. But you talk about the Tim Duncan effect, and sure, he was boosted during those times, but I think more than he wasn't carried by Tim Duncan. It was more so they found a good partnership, they found a groove. They're best friends, and he'll tell you that. He was getting emotional at Tim Duncan's retirement ceremony.
Oh, yeah.
Not because maybe partly because he was losing his franchise player, but he was watching his best friend, be celebrated, and those two formed a relationship that was just very special. And you saw what that could do for a team on the court. But at the same time, once he's gone, Popovich is now working to build new relationships, and he's going to find players that are going to help him get back to where he wants to be, and he's going to help develop them. But it's not really his fault, I would say, if he does have the young players or veteran players.
Mm-hmm. Look, it's kind of a times that we live in. What have you done for me lately? And that's what it feels like. It's very, what have you done for me yesterday? Versus looking at the big picture. And I think this ranking lost focus of the big picture.
Absolutely.
Popovich is still a top 10 coach, in my opinion. Look I get it. It was a 22-win season last year. I understand that. But that team also got hit with injuries late in the season. The Devin Vassell, Sohan, which brings me another point that CBS Sports brought up is Pop's decision making. And specifically, they pointed out the Sohan point guard experiment as a reason why Popovich is not considered top 10, at least in CBS Sports' opinion. That one I had a big issue with.
Sure,
I did. I mean, look at Don Nelson. Nelly Ball. This is what coaches do. They experiment. 7 seconds or less. Mike D'Antoni. Look, I get why Pop did it. I understand why they did it. They've been searching for a big guard for quite some time, from Josh Primo to to Stephon Castle, trying to plug in Sohan. I understand why they did that. But what do you think about that point they brought up, his decision making?
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where you look at the squad that he had, and obviously you do have a guy like Trey Jones, who they ultimately went with near the end of the season once they kind of started to give him more reps at point guard. But initially, they saw Trey Jones as a strong player, but not necessarily their point guard of the future. And they were hoping maybe Jeremy Sohan would be able to be plugged in at that spot. He's not a natural point guard, but can he run the offense effectively? Can he, do enough at the point guard to let Victor shine, to let Zach Collins be down low at the 5, and it didn't work out. I remember when all of this was happening, even Sohan got really frustrated at his new role, because now people were looking at him as a lesser player because he wasn't able to perform, but he was sitting there like, this is not my position, and we can call it a failed experiment. I would say it was, but just because it was one failed experiment, one player that was plugged in a spot that maybe he wasn't supposed to be plugged in, I don't think that you can credit or that you can completely discredit a coach and call it decision making, because you look historically at the decisions that he kept Manu on the bench for as long as Manu was with San Antonio, and that proved to be one of the best places for him. And he wouldn't have found that place for him had he not tried other things. And so I don't think that it's fair to take one decision that didn't quite work out with such a young team at that. It wasn't that it cost them a playoff chance. They were very young, probably weren't going to make the playoffs as was. I don't think that's quite fair to kind of take that one and use it as a way to say, look, his decision making is not there.
Yeah. For all the good that he has done, decision making, you're mentioning, Mono off the bench, the way he decided to go from 4 down Tim Duncan to, hey, you know what, Timmy, this era now is all about the point guard now. Tony, it's your team for a while now. And
right.
Let's face it too, Popovich has never been shy about admitting this, that it's Tim Duncan why he's among the greatest coaches. Popovich says it all the time. I wouldn't be here if it was a Tim Duncan. Those are Tim Duncan's titles. So he acknowledges it too. The same thing with Phil Jackson could probably say too. I don't know about Phil Jackson, but maybe Steve Kerr will say, yeah, Steph Curry is the reason why, Golden State has those banners.
Right.
Not me. I'm not on that court. So, I mean, look, again, it should have been knocked on Popovich because, again, all NBA coaches go through this, losing franchise players. They make decisions that they think that'll be best. Look, you got to put the what out there. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but at least you tried. So, there's so many things about this article. Again, we started this conversation by saying, yes, the article did compliment Popovich. He's an all-time GOAT. He's a basketball Hall of Famer, a multiple-time coach of the year, coach the All-Star team, titles. We get all that. But just as much as the era of the NBA is changing now, coaches got to change with it too. And unfortunately, this was just a dramatic change because you lost Kawhi, you lost Timmy, you lost Manu, you lost Tony. Look, LMA was LMA. It didn't fit, and that was also too a byproduct of the Kawhi Leonard situation. If Kawhi and LMA stayed together and Kawhi didn't get hurt, who knows what happens in that playoff series versus Golden State. So it's just that things happen, injuries happen, players want out. This just happens. Once again, we are joined by Matt Guzman. He writes for Spurs on SI. Make sure to follow him on X at MattGZMA. Still got that blank white background behind you. Look at that. It's like clouds, though. Do I see clouds?
There are clouds. Yes. So this is
okay.
There's just like a screen over the window because I think the backlight would be crazy if it wasn't there.
All right. We're going to continue our chat with Matt Guzman, but first I want to talk to you about FanDuel. Look, you heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. You want to go to FanDuel right now because they have something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That is a really good deal. Go jump on that right now. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account, current form of payment. You can cancel at any time. Again, that is a phenomenal deal. By the way, that FanDuel app, easy to use, very user-friendly. Put your bets in, quick, easy, 1, 2, 3, parlays, win totals, whatever it is. FanDuel is your #1 go-to to have fun with sports all season long. You want to go to FanDuel.com right now. Download America's #1 sportsbook.
Hey, this is Hot Rod.
And I'm RC from the Cybertron Springs.
And you're listening to Locked On Spurs with Jeff Garcia.
All right, let's continue our chat about Popovich and the slight, the disrespect CBS Sports gave him recently on an article. Be sure to follow Matt on X at MattGZMA. And Matt, I'll let you do the honors of the next one. Pick one that you have an issue with that we have not talked about, that you think that maybe CBS should not have gone there.
Yeah, no, I think one of the interesting thing, like you mentioned, they talked about 3-point percentage, like how well are you using your players and have you adapted with the game?
Yeah.
And this is a team that has struggled to find that 3-point shooter they've been looking for. They had Doug McDermott for a little bit last season, then they got rid of him at the trade deadline. This year they're hoping that Harrison Barnes, Harrison Ingram, they can add some shooters and add some depth.
Mhm.
But it seems that Popovich is getting blamed because he hasn't had a solid 3-point game, because the Spurs haven't been known as their 3-point shooter, or as a 3-point shooting team. And to me, that was an interesting one, because I think it's at that point you're kind of taking it a little bit too subjective, in my opinion, because sure, the game has changed and it has, their positionless basketball is thriving now and things look a lot different than they did. But they're basically saying that, look, we're saying that 3-point percentage is the biggest change in the game. And if you're not a good 3-point shooter, we don't like you. We're going to put you lower on this list. And I thought that was interesting to focus so heavily on something like that. Very small part of a game that obviously the Spurs haven't just ignored. They just haven't looked great. And I think that that's an interesting thing to pull at and kind of fault, I guess, against him.
Again, you talk about players leaving, players retiring. What about coaches leaving? Chip England, he left. He left to OKC, and he's considered one of the best shooting doctor gurus in the league. You lose that kind of talent, you're going to see an impact on these players. Tony Parker, we all know that. Not a good shooter. Chip is there. Good, decent shooter. Same thing with Kawhi Leonard. The list goes on and on. Probably Danny Green as well. So, just as much as Pop gets hurt with players leaving or getting traded, so does it with the coaching staff. We're going to have more of that in a bit. But yeah, 3-point percentage, shooting, all that stuff. Again, he's not on that court. He can only do so much in training camp. He can only do so much in preseason and chatting with them during practices. Getting on them during games. He can only do so much. He cannot be out there taking the 3 shots himself. So I think that one was a stretch, in my opinion. I think that one was a big time stretch. Was there anything else on that list that you thought that maybe was like, you know what, you should not have gone there, CBS Sports?
Yeah, one of the more interesting ones that I saw also was whether or not draft picks pan out. Because to me, that's completely, and we talked about this earlier, that's a Brian Wright decision. Gregg Popovich, I'm sure, has some input, but ultimately, if Brian Wright said that Stephon Castle was the guy and Gregg Popovich wasn't really wanting that guy, he gets that guy anyways. If Gregg Popovich didn't want to give up the number 8 draft pick and Brian Wright said, no, we get fair value for it, we're going to give it away. That's not his decision to make. And so, all he can do is take the players that he's given and develop them and work on making them better. And I think that was one of the things that we've seen the last couple of seasons, especially with Victor now. This is a very development heavy team, and they brought in veterans that they didn't have last year. Last year was almost certainly all about getting those young guys more reps, more minutes, and learning how to play alongside their new franchise cornerstone. And so to me, to fault Gregg Popovich because this draft pick didn't work out or this pick didn't pan through, that's not his decision, and all he can do is help make them better. But sometimes pieces just don't fit, and that's absolutely something that falls on the GM and on the front office, more so than it does on Popovich, because I think all he's done is coach these players to the best way that he knows how, and we know that he knows how. He's done it for so long, and so to me that was a little bit of a stretch as well.
Yeah, exactly. Now I want to bring up an interesting point though, is that now we look at the top 10 coaches. Or coaches ranked higher than him. There were some Spurs assistant coaches on there, from Ime Udoka, I believe. Will Hardy was on there. So my question to you, Matt, is that an indictment though on the Spurs not keeping these guys along? Maybe Popovich for still hanging on and seeing that type of coaching talent walk out the door? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Popovich's coaching tree is very extensive. And I remember most recently when the Jazz came to town last season and Will Hardy was speaking, he actually gave major props to the organization as a whole and facing, he commended them for getting a guy like Victor because he knew what they could do with a talent like that. And so seeing guys like that are coming from Pop to walk out the door, I mean, to me, that says more about how strong of a coach Popovich is and how, the things that he does, the way he runs his system rubs off on the guys around him and rubs off on even the video coordinators and the ball boys, and like it's a very tight knit group that they kind of have over there. And so I don't think it's necessarily his fault. In fact, it should be, if you asked him, I'm sure he'd be happier that they ended up leaving and going on to do great things with other franchises. He's not sitting here jealous that he doesn't have them anymore. He's glad that he was able to play a part on them and impact, other franchises, and just kind of, he knows that he's doing the right thing. And now this guy is going to go and do what's best for him. And so I don't think it's necessarily an indictment. I almost see it more as, maybe he could have been ranked higher because of that, because there are other other coaches higher than him that have come from him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you look at Popovich's coaching tree, I actually think that should work for him, not against him.
Right.
Because, I'm pretty sure all those guys that we just listed and those people that came off the tree, will probably say, yeah, if I have to redo this list, he's top 10. He still is. And think about this too. He took a Spurs team last year to close out strong. They close out really, really strong.
Right.
He's been exercising patience in this rebuild. He's not using the S word a lot, soft. I haven't heard him call this team soft in a long, long, long time, maybe once or twice during this playoff dry spell. So, he's learning to adapt. And look, the game is now pretty much no defense. I mean, you can't touch anybody now, and Popovich is a defensive-minded guy, so he's going to have his time to adjust as well. Before we wrap up this topic of conversation here and get into some Locked On Spurs YouTube comments here, Matt, I want to ask you, though, where would you rank, though? Would you put him on your top 10? Because me personally, I have him at 10. If I had to pick one, I would put him at 10.
Sure. I think, to me, he does fall in that top 10 category. And I'm kind of taking the approach of, if I had to put him top 10, who would I bump down? And it's that's a tough decision to make, really, because I feel I think tier 3 and above, those are guys that are either young or they're very established and they have, they've found recent success, which is where they have Popovich beat. But I think, he's well deserving of a top 10 ranking. I would put him at 10 or even 9. And my curiosity now is, if the Spurs are to turn things around this year or the next season, all of a sudden, are they going to flip the script and say, oh, he's still a top 10 coach of all,
oops, that.
This year, you put him at 14. So I'm curious, this is, how that's going to develop. But I definitely do think he's deserving of a top 10, of a spot in that top 10.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to continue our chat with Matt Guzman. We're going to be shifting gears now. We're going to be looking at the Locked On Spurs YouTube fan comments. You guys are leaving a bunch of them. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about Game Time. You want to go to gametime.co right now, San Antonio. Game Time is a new feature, which is called the Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Like the app also filters out the fluff, so you're going to get incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They have it all. Lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, the super deal. They got it all. You even get views from your seats, so you can know where you're going to be looking at, how you're going to be taking in the event right on that app. By the way, that Game Time Picks, just want to reiterate that creation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, so much more. Those seat views, well, again, you get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy. And the lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Can't beat that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, let's continue our chat with Matt Guzman. He is a writer for Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Follow him on X at MattGZMAN. He'll talk about what he's doing in just a few seconds. But can't forget about you guys, Locked On Spurs fans. You guys are leaving a bunch of comments. We're going to pick 2, and we're going to react to them right now. All right, Matt, a few days ago, we had a spotlight episode on City Sissoko. How does he fit? Where does he fit? Does he fit on this current Spurs roster? And a lot of Spurs fans, or Locked On Spurs fans, are leaving some comments about that. So the first one is from Cool Playa 01. Sounds like a rap group. Cool Playa 01. We appreciate that. Leaving that comment here. But he says Sissoko, must improve his shooting and his offensive game. Otherwise, I think he's not going to be with the team in 2 to 3 years. Where do you stand with that comment? And where do you stand with Sissoko moving forward on the roster?
Yeah, and I remember a couple of weeks back when we talked about 2K ratings, he was a player that I kind of thought should have been higher or could have been higher. But And in terms of the comment, I think it's fair. I think it's a very fair assessment because right from day one, he came in and he was unfortunately, the other French prospect along with Victor Wembanyama. He kind of had an uphill battle to kind of carve his way on a young team like this. But he was very high on his defense. And as we mentioned, Popovich being a defensive-minded coach, and, it's a pretty known fact that you play good defense, that's how you're going to get minutes on the court. And so he's very good at that aspect. And at Summer League, he showed it. In the limited minutes he had last season, he showed it. But I would agree. I think that, he needs to not only take a few more shots, but he needs to be able to hit them. I think he his stats are 8.3% from three with only one attempt on average per game. He doesn't shoot very much from three, but even from the field, just below 50%. That's definitely one of those things where he's got the defensive part of it, and you can throw him out there and trust that he's not going to let up, easy. He's not going to get blown by. He's not going to let up easy shots. But if he can't produce for you on the offensive end, that's not a player that it can last very long. It's not a viable player in the NBA. I do like his potential. I think he can do there or get there, especially as the Spurs as a whole continue to get better. I'm really high on him. I have high hopes for him personally. So I do hope that he gets there, but I think it's a very fair assessment.
Also, too, we have a very small sample size with Sissoko in San Antonio.
Right.
Very small, and then when he did get minutes, it was either in garbage time or, at the end of the season where games didn't really matter. So you got to give him time to cook. Is he on the bubble? I think I'm not there yet, but he's definitely on the radar. He's gonna have to show something. And then you add this in too. He's playing behind guys like Keldon and Devin and Harrison Barnes, and it'll be rough for him. I'm not going to be surprised if he goes to Austin, again, nor buried on the bench. But his time to shine is coming up in training camp, preseason. So we'll see what he has. Thank you for that comment there. The next comment is from Civ Tex. He says, prediction. Chris Paul will be the next head coach after Pop for the Spurs. Kind of keep it on brand with this episode here. Yeah, I don't know about that, Civ Tex. I don't know Chris Paul, head coach in San Antonio. I don't even know if he wants to be coaching after his career is done. He said he didn't come to San Antonio to coach. That he did say that he will help the guys, just as any veteran would. But he's here to win, not necessarily coach. CivTech, love you. Leaving that comment there, but I think that's a reach. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with that. I would love to see his odds at becoming the next head coach of the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm sure that'd be quite interesting. But as you mentioned, this is a player that, if coaching is in his future, we're about to see a little bit of it. He's got a very young team to work with. And obviously, like we said, he's come to win. He knows what he wants. He understands the expectations of him to be that mentor and that helping hand. But at the same time, he gave up. He could have signed with a contender in the offseason, but instead he chose to come here because he wants to hoop. And, he's one of the biggest examples of an NBA free agent wanting to play with somebody like Victor Wembanyama. So I'm curious to see how he does on the court. I'm not so sure he's going to be on the sideline too much coaching. I guess we'll have to see, but I'm agree with you there, Jeff.
Yeah. Again, appreciate the comment there, Civ, but likely not going to happen. He is Matt Guzman with the Spurs on Sports Illustrated. We've been talking about it throughout this show. What's going on in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, so either today or tomorrow, I'm going to be wrapping up. I guess, I'll be wrapping up my 5 Beyond Wemby series for year 2, where I kind of take 5 players that are not Victor Wembanyama. Who are they? Why do they matter? How can they help the Spurs? And are they primed for a breakout season or not? And so this year I did Blake Wesley. I had Jamari Bouye, interestingly, and they just waived him. So maybe he lands back with the Austin Spurs. That's your right. Fault. So felt like a little slap in the face there, but we're gonna have Devin Vassell rounding out that group. So either way, that's kind of what I've got going on over here.
Yeah. You earlier were talking about your background, how you're in front of a window, you saw the clouds and everything right now. Why don't you just tell the truth? You're really, in Cloud City in Star Wars, right? In Lando.
That's right.
Yeah, you're there right now, right? And I'm jealous.
That's right. Yeah,
hang out with Lando.
I will be having to jump into Lightspeed to make it to training camp, but I will be there. So
absolutely. He is Matt Guzman. Again, follow him on X at MattGZMAN. Make sure you do that right now. Hey, we'll be back tomorrow talking more Silver and Black as the Spurs offseason is starting to wind down. Training camp is just ahead. Matt and I were talking about this before we recorded the show, that media day is just rapidly coming. I mean, I feel like I was there just yesterday in training camp. Seriously,
That's
NBA
right.
needs a real off season, Matt, where it's just like a time to breathe. They don't give you a time to breathe at all.
Really don't.
And they really, really don't. Hey, everybody, check out Locked On NBA. Covers all things NBA in general. You want to go and subscribe to that right now on YouTube. And again, subscribe to Locked On Spurs on YouTube, Cans 5 Plus app, iTunes, Spotify. Seriously, we are everywhere. And again, we'll be back tomorrow with more Silver and Black talk. So for Matt Guzman, I am Jeff Garcia. We're going to put a lock on this episode of Locked On Spurs.